Hello, this is the White Scorpio. I'm doing a video called Who is Aryan? And I'm doing a general overview covering a lot of different things about the Aryans, like what they looked like, their history, their DNA, their language. And it's a good place to get you rolling on some of your Aryan research. So feel free to pause anything and I'll get started. I got about 30 slides to go through. I started here with the Wikipedia article Aryan because a lot of people would probably start there, even though a lot of this is basically Aryan denigration, and because we know that they don't like the word Aryan, and it's if you call yourself Aryan, you know, you're a Nazi or a racist today. If you say you're my Aryan brother, then you're a prison gang all of a sudden, and all these things are used to denigrate our people, and when we should be glorified as the greatest people on the earth. And I'll explain. So one thing they call Aryans is the Yamna. Like in my DNA thing, they called it the Yamna, but they're still Aryan. And the Yamna created the corded ware culture, and then that created other cultures as they, spread over the world. And the Aryans are basically credited with, and there's just some disputing this. I mean, there's different theories, but a lot of modern scientists actually still believe that the Aryans are credited with, horse riding. They believe the Aryans are credited with, domestication of the cow and the wheel. Some say it's other cultures, but a lot of scientists do give the Aryans credit for the creation of the wheel, and also especially the chariot, which was an amazing technological achievement at the time. And we will cover those. This is like a purport from the Bhagavad Gita as it is. And I brought this up because it's one of those, the Bhagavad Gita is from the Mahabharata. It's just an ancient Vedic text. And on the bottom half of this they talk about the word Aryan. And you can read that for yourself. Here's an example of a Yamna person that they dug up on the left with a red ochre they use in the burial process, supposedly, and the cast of what they could have looked like. Here's your classic Aryan chariot and riders. Here's another one that was actually dug up. Some kind of model. So I want to cover the DNA of the Aryans. And this is like a tree of the patriarchal line, the Y DNA. That's the male line. And haplogroup R, there at the bottom, being one of the most evolved or most recent of this tree, and the haplogroup R is the one that's most associated with as being Aryan, based on research by the scientists, bodies found and dug up and tested. And R has these subtypes, which we'll cover here, is R1A, R1B, and I've read some stuff that says that R1A was first, but other stuff says R1B was actually first. But regardless of that, they're both very similar, and like cousins or brothers. And this is what it looks like today. So most people in Western Europe are R1B, and of course most people in the United States, most men in the United States are R1B. And then you have R1A, which is Eastern Europe and Russia. And people, also there's some groups still in India that still carry some R1A blood. but it's in small percentages in some areas, but they're still there. And you can see that Scandinavia is less Aryan, and this in the Slavic, or not the Slavic, the Baltic countries being less Aryan. But they still have, you know, percentages in all these places. Like here you can see that R1b dominates Western Europe, that's the red. Ireland. And Ireland actually means like the land of the Aryan, just like Iran does as well. And you can see Ireland is very pure R1b, very Aryan. And you can see in Eastern Europe, you can see R1a, a lot of Aryan presence. And one thing to note from this is interesting is how you notice Scandinavia is, at least as far as the male line, is much less Aryan than I expected. Especially Finland, being mostly the N haplogroup. Here's another one showing the native populations of the world. This one right here is basically the United States, and you see that 50% of the population of the males are R1b, that's me, and R1a there is another area, and that's 6%. So, you know, the majority of the men in the United States are Aryan. So America could definitely be called an Aryan country, an Aryan land, an Aryan nation. This I threw in there to show you that what basically it's a quick way to explain haplotypes, is that the red is being the female, that's the mitochondrial DNA. So a woman would carry her mothers and her mothers and her mothers, and the male would carry, that's on the left, the blue, his fathers and his fathers and his fathers. And that's the Y DNA. The Aryans were a very patriarchal people. And, you know, Arya is like, well, it makes you think of the air, because that's what they did. They believed in this, like the sky god, that God was above us. This is a map chart showing the females, mtDNA. I don't know as much about the female Aryans, but there were female Aryans, and they brought some of them with them, but a lot of times the Aryan men would take local women along the way. And so there's like a more variety of the females than there are of the males, it seems like in some ways. This right here is the language of the Aryans. In the Indo-European languages, you know, like the ancient ones like Sanskrit, etc., these are all down from there. And you can show that Europe is dominated almost entirely by Aryan languages, along with Iran and India. And this is one showing kind of like the language and invasion routes, or colonization routes, because it was probably a combination of both as they expanded. And so you can see like the Greek, and you know, Greek, German, all that, Indian, all that's is all Aryan. This right here is interesting. I popped it up because of the description of the video, who is Aryan. And a lot of people say that, you know, blonde hair and blue eye is Aryan, but a lot of scientists is contrary to that. Like this one right here is one of the oldest men ever to have blue eyes, was discovered in northwest Spain, 7,000-year-old body. And they found that he had Scandinavian type blood, and that he also had dark skin genes of an African, and he did not have lactose tolerance. So that's a big sign that he was not Aryan. And here's an example of light eyes. And you can see there's definitely a connection between Aryans and light eyes. However, a lot of evidence points that it's more likely that the Aryans conquered the women that were light-eyed and bred with them, and so like basically incorporated all those genes into ours, and that spread across the world. Because at one time the Aryans were much more dominant in the world than they are today, as far as like the spread of them. Now we're focused up in Europe and America. This one's interesting, and about halfway down I wanted to read, light pigmentation traits had thus already existed in pre-Indo-Europeans, Aryans, since at least the later Mesolithic. Later individuals with the Yamnaya ancestry, that's Aryan, by contrast were predominantly dark-eyed, dark-haired, and had a skin color that was moderately light, though somewhat darker than that of the average modern European. So, you know, it's possible that basically the Aryans, when they came into Europe, they bred with, like, say, the women, most likely, according, because I've read a lot more stuff than what I'm showing you here, that's how they incorporated a lot of these lighter traits. Selection. But the men, a lot of the native men of Europe were wiped out, which you can see from those earlier haplotype things, that the people, like the people who built the Stone Age, they believe were non-Aryan. Okay, here's one of light hair, and you can see light hair, you know, there's not necessarily a connection between light hair and Aryan. I mean, like the Finnish up there have the lightest hair, but the Finnish are, according to that other thing, are not very Aryan. I mean, I'm sure they have some Aryan in them, but especially haplotype is non-Aryan. So, you know, there's not really a direct connection between light hair, light eyes with Aryans. The Aryans were probably darker, brown, other mixed colors, and then incorporated these lighter traits later. So here's one showing the lactose tolerance, which is very Aryan, because the Aryans were even credited with, you know, domestication of the cow, and definitely the utilization, the primary utilization of it, because lactose, you know, cow milk, raw cow milk, reduces disease and built like a stronger man over the wheat-eating peoples, or just the hunter-gatherers. So you can see here that Germany, Spain, and Northern Europe have the highest ability to drink the milk and the cheese. Here's another chart showing that. Europe and America, you know, and China, Africa, etc., being very lactose intolerant. Another one showing the same. The highest tolerance found in, you know, the Isles. A group in India they have a significant lactose tolerance. Still to this day, that's good. And another one showing lactose tolerance being dominated by Europe. This one is interesting. You probably have to pause it to read the whole thing. And like some kind of internal arguing on this one. It's still, and this one right here is a Indo-European Aryan one theory, you know, showing the homeland being, our homeland being in Ukraine, and but it's, and spreading out from there. Of course, this doesn't show the longer picture. I mean, this whole video doesn't really span really the ancient, like 15, 20, 30,000 years ago. It's mainly more in like the last 10,000 years. But a lot of the cultures that you've heard of in your life, like the Persians and the Hittites, you know, the Greeks and all kinds of cultures, were purely Aryan cultures. Even calling themselves Aryans, like son of Aryans, in ancient inscriptions. There's another one just showing the migration routes of the Yamnaya or Aryan people, west and east. Here's another one that shows, it's because a lot of these are speculation, but there's a people in Africa down there in Chad that have like a V88, but they're still R1b, male bloodline, because there was a group of Aryans that went through Israel and through Egypt and down the Nile long ago, and even settled around Lake Chad in Africa. And they say, like, back then Lake Chad was much, much larger, like dramatically larger than it is today. So Aryans have been all over the place, and there's still males down there with a certain percentage of them, like a few million or something, that still have carry the R1B blood male line, even though they look just like any other African. That's right there. You can see the V88. That's one of the terms they use for that particular branch of R1B. And so you can see here, basically the Aryans dominated Iran and Central Asia, Russia, and then exploded out and went to India, took over Europe, and now today most of us live in Europe and the United States. And as far as the patriarchal Aryan, as the Aryans were a patriarchal people. And of course Aryan means noble and civilized and all that, but it still is a people to carry the word. And now with genetics they've proven this. So I hope this was informative, get you started on, who is Aryan. And to summarize, the Aryan people are credited with the invention of the wheel, domestication of all kinds of animals, cats and horses and dogs and all kinds of stuff is credited to the Aryan. And the wheel and chariots, advanced forms of warfare. And they had extreme health because of the cow milk. The raw cow milk gave them a much higher health than other peoples they found, because raw cow milk gives you actually a disease resistance. Even to this day, if you drink that raw, you'll have a higher disease resistance, and that's been linked and proven. Like smallpox and other things, you have resistance to. So there's a connection between, as far as who is Aryan today. A blue eyes, blonde hair doesn't mean that you are Aryan. That's one thing we've learned from this, that you can still be a totally different haplotype. Which means your father's father's father was not Aryan. He's somebody else, like in Finland, for instance. Although you may have some ancestors and relatives that are Aryan. The predominant Aryan, as far as the most concentration of them, is definitely going to be like England and Ireland, and it looks like that other chart earlier showed Germany, France and Spain, northern Italy. And, then you have the R1A Aryans, and there's a lot of them in Ukraine and Russia, Western Russia, Poland. United States is over. The majority of the men in the United States are Aryan men, predominantly R1B. And so the Aryan we stretched all the way to India, and now that over time, because of race mixing and war, the Aryans have been definitely pushed back just into Europe, which we took from the native inhabitants, which were other haplotypes and bloodlines. The males that once were 100% in Europe are now, depending on the area, less than 10%. Or even less of the original males. So, it's pretty interesting. But I would say Aryans, and according to a lot of the research I've seen, is they credit Aryans as being basically R1B, R1A. So if you have one of those two on your gene test, then you can be pretty sure you're Aryan. There's subclads, etc. But don't be ashamed of yourself if you don't have blue eyes and blonde hair, because those traits blue eyes and blonde hair doesn't mean you're Aryan. You could just as easily as be, an N, which is like basically a Chinaman. You can be like a Chinaman type, Asiatic haplotype. What really counts is you have to do your gene test to really know. So we can't promote our blonde hair and blue eyes as being the perfect Aryan. It may be desirable for some people, but the dark hair is actually, according to a lot of this research, more Aryan, and that those other traits, the light eyes and light hair, was selected by Aryan men, picking females that had those traits as desirable, and incorporated the genes into our families. And it's good to know that Aryan people are very ancient, very powerful. Many of the most famous civilizations, like I said, the Persians and Hittites, and some even say the Sumerians, were all Aryan tribes. The Greeks were Aryan. The Vedics, where the Vedas come from, and all that, Aryan. So, thank you for listening. I hope you learned a little bit, and I always welcome you to do your own research. And remember, this is just a general video, an outline, and science is still growing. 50 years ago they didn't have very little of this, but they still knew they were Aryan. Even 100 years ago, they still knew they were Aryan. I have a friend that was taught that in school in the 50s, that they were Aryans here in the United States. So they knew they were Aryan, but they didn't have like a lot of the hard science to back it up. But they were right. So, thank you for listening. Have a good one. White Scorpio out.